Hey everybody, and we are back talking for the first time about the AFC West. It's actually my third take of this video now, but you know what? I will gladly talk about the Denver Broncos on three separate occasions. Much better than having to talk about Arizona three times. So, give a little bit of background on Denver here. Really not too much to say. This is a franchise that has not made the postseason since, of course, winning Super Bowl 50 back in at the conclusion of the 2015 season. So that means they have since missed the postseason the following 7 seasons. Definitely a franchise that is starved for some postseason success, to say the least, and really besides a 9-7 record following up that Super Bowl, they haven't even had a winning record since the 2015 season. So, looking at last season, the 2022 season, because this was the year where everything was really supposed to turn around. They bring in Russell Wilson. They finally have their franchise quarterback for the first time since Peyton Manning. They hire Nathaniel Hackett, former offensive coordinator with the Green Bay Packers, had done some fantastic work with Aaron Rodgers there, leading him to back-to-back MVPs in 2020, 2021. But despite the hype, Nathaniel Hackett actually only gets 15 games as head coach before he gets fired with a 4-11 record as at the helm. But I do find that very fascinating because, in the NFL, I understand it is every season we need immediate success, and teams' fortunes can certainly turn on a dime, but to fire a guy before he even finishes his first season, that seems like jumping the gun a little bit too quickly, at least for me. But like I always say, what do I know? I'm not an NFL executive, so these guys must know something that we don't, right? They end up with a 5-12 record, though, when all is said and done in 2022, and just looking at some of the more noticeable things that stood out to me about this 2022 Broncos roster, their defense was a fringe top 10 unit. They end up 7th overall in terms of yards allowed and 14th in terms of points allowed, and finishing with only the 5th fewest touchdowns allowed, actually, in the 5th fewest passing touchdowns, excuse me, in the NFL last season. So definitely not a bad defense by any means, but that was really offset by the offense being absolutely abysmal. They were arguably one of the worst offenses in the National Football League last year. They were worst when it came to scoring points, which, newsflash, that's how you win games. You need to score some points. So Denver was last in the league last year in terms of scoring points on offense, and certainly not going to lead to W's that way. But when you really start to look at these games last year, and we can go through the schedule here. Sorry, I wanted to get this off of the screen there to give us a little more room to work with. So looking at the schedule last year, they lose a lot of these games in very close fashion. So 3 of them here in overtime to the Indianapolis Colts, Los Angeles Chargers, and Las Vegas Raiders. But then they even lose another 6 games by just 1 possession. So I can bring those up here as well. And it really just goes to show that despite everything that went wrong for Denver last year, this was a team that was consistently in ball games, and they were consistently there down the stretch when time was running out on the clock. So really, when you look at this, there's only 3 losses they had that were by more than 1 score. So certainly their fortunes can change in 2023 if just a few things go differently for them. Looking further down here at some of the other individual statistics, the man who got the most hype last year heading into the season, Russell Wilson, really did not live up to the hype. To be frank, he was quite bad at the quarterback position. No disrespect to Russ, we know what he's capable of, and that's what makes it all the more frustrating. 15 games started with a 4-11 record, 3,500 passing yards, and 16 touchdowns, 11 interceptions through the air. Certainly not impressive in the slightest. I wouldn't even say he was a top 20 quarterback in the NFL last year. Certainly looking for a bounce back season in 2023. Some of the other more notables from last season, players was injuries, honestly. So some notable players that were injured for the Denver Broncos were Javonte Williams, who was supposed to be their starting running back. He ends up with just 4 games played, 204 yards, and 0 touchdowns on the ground. Tim Patrick misses the entire season due to injury, and in fact, spoiler alert, he will actually miss the entire 2023 season as well, unfortunately. So, hope Tim Patrick will be able to find himself back on an NFL field in 2024 and really turn around his career, because he really showed a lot of promise when he was on the field for the Denver Broncos 2 years ago now. So, one more player I will mention was another big addition for them in 2022, and that was Randy Gregory, from formerly of the Dallas Cowboys. And Randy Gregory ends up with just 6 games played, 3 games started, and he does get 2 sacks and 2 forced fumbles in those appearances, so he was making an impact. 7 quarterback hits, 2 tackles for a loss. If he could be back and healthy for them this year, that would certainly go a long way. One other thing I will point out here with the offensive statistics, we'll look at the receiving. Jerry Jeudy on the brink of 1,000 yards. He ends up with 972 yards through the air with 6 touchdowns. So, to my surprise, Jerry Jeudy has yet to crack 1,000 yards as an NFL receiver, and I think this just might be the year he does it. He's been trending in the right direction. And now the Broncos have made some adjustments in this offseason to certainly put their offense in a better position for success this year. And I think this is the year Jerry Jeudy finally gets over that hump. So, looking at the defense again one more time, the only Pro Bowler on this roster last year was Pat Surtain II, of course, one of the best young corners in the NFL, perhaps even one of the best corners in the NFL period right now. Only at the age of 22 last season, so still very much a young man. Started all 17 games for the Denver Broncos, gets 2 interceptions, 10 passes deflected, 1 forced fumble, and even gets 2 tackles for a loss and a quarterback hit. So certainly making a massive impact. And honestly, cornerbacks are so hard to evaluate just off of the stat sheet, because the really their impact is felt most by the fact that quarterbacks aren't throwing the ball their way. I'm sure Pat Surtain's going to see that as he continues to blossom as one of the great young corners in the National Football League, where opposing quarterbacks will just avoid throwing his way entirely. And finally, before we move on from the 2022 Broncos, one thing that really stood out to me was Justin Simmons. So he only plays 12 games last year as a safety for the Denver Broncos, but in those 12 games, he gets 6 interceptions. So for every game he was playing, or rather every 2 games he was playing, he was getting 1 interception. Absolutely incredible pace he was on last season. So with that being said, we'll look at what Denver did in the 2023 offseason. Just to recap, if this is the first time seeing this format of video, on the left-hand column here we have the players' 2022 team. On the right-hand column will be their 2023 team. And then over here, the percentage of snaps they played for their team in 2022. Although, of course, I will fill you in on all the players who are really of note here if you are just listening to this. So we'll start off with the players, the notable players that departed from the Denver Broncos last year. And we'll start out with defensive lineman Draymond Jones, who goes to the Seattle Seahawks. He played 57, nearly 58% of snaps last season as an interior defensive lineman, and they actually lose another defensive lineman as well in Deshaun Williams, and he leaves for the Carolina Panthers. So certainly a void to be filled on the interior of the defensive line, and they also lose on the offensive side of the ball guard Graham Glasgow to the Detroit Lions, who we will talk about in the next video. Detroit is on deck, but he plays 81% of snaps for Denver last season. Age 31 season, he moves on to Detroit. And finally, I will mention Brandon McManus, their longtime kicker. Always very consistent for them. Certainly helps that they play in the altitude in Denver, where it makes life a little bit easier on the kicker. He departs for North Florida to join Doug Peterson and the Jacksonville Jaguars. So certainly look for Denver to address the kicking position, which that's probably a good segue into their acquisitions this last offseason. And I'll start with the kicking position. As we mentioned in the Dallas video, Brett Maher leaves the Dallas Cowboys to join the Denver Broncos. And we can see here, age 34, so he probably figures to be Denver's kicker this year. Although There is a competition going on right now for the kicking position, one of the few teams where I'd say that is the case at this point in the season. But some of the other notable acquisitions this past offseason: Mike McGlinchey, right tackle from the San Francisco 49ers, played 94% of snaps for them last season. He joins the Denver Broncos, where he will likely be their starting right tackle. Definitely be interested when we get to the San Francisco video on whether they're able to really replace him, because San Francisco's offensive line is certainly something I don't think is being talked about with them enough, but we'll save that for when we get to the 49ers. Some of the other notable acquisitions for Denver: they bring in, as we mentioned in the Bengals video, running back Samaje Perine. Now, he definitely figures to be a nice number two in a 1-2 punch with Javonte Williams, who will hopefully be back and healthy this year, but you'll see less of the chaos we saw last year in Denver's backfield and more consistency with two just solid running backs in Javonte Williams and Samaje Perine, who Sean Payton and Russell Wilson can rely on in the backfield. I guess this would be a good time to mention, too, of course, the Broncos did bring in Sean Payton as their head coach, formerly of the New Orleans Saints, didn't coach in the NFL last year, though he is now back with the Denver Broncos and is already making headlines, as is probably well known, taking some shots at Nathaniel Hackett, his predecessor, in the media. But not to waste too much time on Sean Payton, talking about some of the other Broncos additions: they bring in Zach Allen from the Arizona Cardinals to help alleviate some of the losses on their defensive line. He played 59% of snaps for Arizona last season. And then they also bring in Ben Powers from the Baltimore Ravens as at the guard position, so he will certainly help offset the loss of Graham Glasgow. Additionally, I will mention Fabian Moreau, a cornerback from the New York Giants. He played 66% of snaps in his age 29 season for the Giants. And then finally, probably you could say the biggest addition for this Denver Broncos unit, and that is none other than Frank Clark of the Kansas City Chiefs. Of course, Frank Clark won 2 Super Bowls with the Kansas City Chiefs: Super Bowl 54 following the 2019 season, and more recently, just this past season, Super Bowl 57. So very exciting to bring him in. Certainly going to be a huge asset for this Denver team. Now, I will quickly go over the Broncos 2022 draft. There was a lot of movement here, so basically Denver originally traded their first round pick to the Seattle Seahawks in that Russell Wilson trade. So that's why Seattle had the 5th overall selection in last year's draft. That could have been Denver's, but they traded it for their 16 touchdown quarterback. Sorry, done dunking on Russell Wilson, I promise. But Denver does actually end up with another first round pick by the end of the regular season, because they traded Bradley Chubb to the Miami Dolphins, and they acquired, bear with me as you try to keep up with this. So this was originally San Francisco's first round pick that was traded to Miami, that Miami then traded to Denver. However, Denver didn't end up keeping that selection. They end up trading back to acquire more draft capital. So when all is said and done for the 2022 draft, the 2023 draft, don't know why I said 2022. They did lose their first round pick for Russell Wilson in 2022 as well. Perhaps that's what confused me. But in the 2023 draft, when all is said and done, the Denver Broncos make 5 selections. They select Marvin Mims, wide receiver, in the 2nd round, who, as we'll see in a second, certainly will have opportunity this year. They select Drew Sanders, linebacker, in the 3rd round, as well as Riley Moss, defensive back, also of the 3rd round. Then they don't pick again until the 6th round, where they take J.L. Skinner, safety from Boise State, and then finally, to round things out, they'd select Alex Forsyth in the 7th round, who actually might have a bit of a future with the Denver Broncos beyond 2023, so definitely keep an eye out for him as a 7th round pick, maybe making a name for himself. With that being said, that's probably a good segue to the Broncos 2023 depth chart. Granted, it is still very early on in the preseason, so many of these spots are still certainly up for grabs, but we'll start off with the quarterback position. Russell Wilson, he's definitely going to be the quarterback. Not really much of a debate there. Jarrett Stidham backing him up. Not really much of a debate there as well, and Ben DiNucci as the third stringer. Pretty clear pecking order at the quarterback spot. One thing I do think is interesting with this Denver Broncos quarterback in 2023, Russell Wilson, and the dynamic with him and Sean Payton. They are one of only 3 teams right now that have a quarterback and a head coach that have won the Super Bowl. The other two being just the last 2 Super Bowl champions, the Kansas City Chiefs with Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes, and the Los Angeles Rams with Sean Payton, not Sean Payton, the Broncos have Sean Payton, Sean McVay and Matthew Stafford, but there is not one other team in the NFL that has a head coach and a quarterback who have won a Super Bowl. And crazy as it is, it's already coming up now on 10 years since Russell Wilson, the Legion of Boom, and the Seattle Seahawks won Super Bowl 48 over the Denver Broncos. Crazy how time flies, and it's now been 14 seasons since Sean Payton, Drew Brees, and the New Orleans Saints won Super Bowl 44. Time really just escapes us. Really wonder where it goes, but moving on with the Broncos depth chart here, just thought that was a fun little fact. As we mentioned, they're going to have the 1-2 punch of Javonte Williams and Samaje Perine at running back. Is a competition going on for that third spot behind them between Tyler Batty, Tony Jones Jr., and Jaleel McLaughlin. So, ideally for Denver, these 3 gentlemen don't see the field too much because Williams and Perine are able to stay healthy and on the field, but certainly the battle will be contentious because whoever does emerge victorious will get whatever few reps are remaining when these 2 are not on the field. Looking now at their wide receiving situation, certainly notable here because Tim Patrick is once again out for the season this year. And I will mention as well, KJ Hamler, their former second-round pick back in 2020 out of Penn State, been dealing with just injury after injury, it seems. He is no longer with the Denver Broncos at all. They seem to have just looked to turn the page from that era with him, which is unfortunate. I thought him and Jerry Jeudy, Tim Patrick, Courtland Sutton, they were really building a special receiving core there. But looking at the players we still have, of course, they do have Courtland Sutton and Jerry Jeudy as that 1-2 punch. And you could argue there's a competition between the 2 of them as to who's going to be the number 1 target on this offense, although my knee-jerk reaction would suggest that it is Jerry Jeudy. I think, one, he is the younger player. We know that much, but I do believe his ceiling in the NFL is much higher than Courtland Sutton, although Courtland Sutton probably is the more proven talent at the NFL level so far. He's probably the higher floor player, more consistent so far. Whereas Jerry Jeudy he can just disappear some games, but then really just stand out in others. I think this is the year, though, he finally puts it together and establishes himself as the clear number 1 in this offense. Then Marvin Mims Jr. should figure to be the number 3 now, their second-round pick this year, with the absence of Tim Patrick and KJ Hamler. So while the injuries are unfortunate, it is a fantastic opportunity for Marvin Mims, and he does provide something fresh for this Denver offense that could potentially benefit Russell Wilson. And there is a competition going on for the number 4 spot behind these guys. Some of the names in the mix here are Jalen Virgil, Kendall Hinton, Marquez Callaway, Brandon Johnson, and Montrell, Washington. All of them listed throughout here, but definitely interesting to note that in the Broncos' first preseason game against the Arizona Cardinals, none of those players really produced that much, if they played at all. So definitely found that fascinating. Another thing that was fascinating to me was Russell Wilson and Jerry Jeudy and many of the Denver Broncos stars on offense played well into the second quarter. They had 3 full series on offense, which you rarely see in today's NFL anymore, but they did end up connecting on a touchdown, Russell Wilson and Jerry Jeudy, to cap things off on a 4th down at that. So definitely encouraging if you're a Broncos fan to see that. Looking now at this offensive line, so Denver's offensive line is certainly I would say firmly an above average unit in the NFL. Definitely fringe top 10. A lot of players here that aren't bad by any means, but I don't think there's a true star on this offensive line, at least not yet. They have Garrett Bowles, their 1st-round pick from 2017 at left tackle. Ben Powers, as we mentioned, who they brought in from the Baltimore Ravens, slated to start at left guard. Lloyd Cushenberry, their fourth-year player at center, their third-round pick in 2020. Quinn Miners at right guard, their third-round pick from 2021, so third-year player. And then, as we mentioned, Mike McGlinchey, their right tackle from the San Francisco 49ers. So definitely stability with this starting unit. I would say all five of those players are firmly situated in their role, not really facing too much competition behind them, and not really worried about guys getting swapped around between roles. So definitely good that those five players are going to really be able to master their role in the offense as we get further along with the preseason. But like I said, there really isn't one standout player on this offensive line. There isn't when we get to the 49ers, I don't think their offensive line's anything overly impressive, but they do have Trent Williams at left tackle, something like that. Or how with the Dallas Cowboys, they have a couple question marks, but they still have Tyron Smith and Zach Martin, who you know you can depend on. But I wouldn't really say there's a weak link on this offensive line either. So, like I said, firmly an above average unit. Maybe if one of these guys can really have a breakout season, they can elevate themselves into a top 10 unit, but definitely would prove to be difficult with a lot of these guys already being well-established veterans, though. Two of these guys are with a new team this year, so that's entirely possible, and Lloyd Cushenberry is in a contract year. And I think that is worth noting too, because Denver is looking for a potential succession plan here on the off chance that they aren't able to pay Lloyd Cushenberry beyond this year and are forced to let him depart to another team. So as of right now, this backup center position is absolutely up for battle at training camp. And the contenders are Kyle Fuller, Luke Wattenberg, and the rookie Alex Forsyth. So certainly worth keeping an eye on that. Lloyd Cushenberry still obviously is on the inside track to be the starting center this year, but these three gentlemen are competing to potentially have that role next season. And finally, I will mention the tight end position. So they do have Gregory Dulcich as their starting tight end, second-year player for them. And then Sean Payton does bring Adam Trotman from the New Orleans Saints. So bit of a connection there as well. On that, I think we can move on to the Denver defense. And Denver defense, like we mentioned earlier, this was actually a sneaky impressive unit last year. I would say most of that is certainly attributed to the secondary, but that being said, we could start with the defensive line here. Denver runs a 3-4 defensive scheme, so only 3 down linemen on defense. They have Zach Allen, as we mentioned, from Arizona, DJ Jones at the nose tackle position, and Jonathan Harris also on the other outside position. Those spots aren't really up for debate as of right now. They're pretty well ingrained with those roles as it would seem right now. Although there is a bit of a battle going on for who will be the first rotational man in behind them. So some of the names you have in the mix here are Matt Henningsen, Jonathan Harris, which he might even be listed as he's listed as a starter here. So I suppose this spot is up for battle. Tyler Lancaster, listed back here, and finally PJ Mustipher, listed all the way down here on the depth chart. So potential battle going on there on the defensive line, but Denver's defensive line is certainly, I would say, the weakest weakest aspect of this defense, and honestly, it might be the area of this entire team that could use the most improvement, if we're being honest, because Denver's offense seems pretty well-rounded at the moment, just looking at it through position by position. And on this defense, we'll look at the linebackers and secondary in a second, but I do have a lot of confidence in both of those positions. The defensive line, though, definitely leaves something to be desired, I would say, especially after they lose 2 defensive linemen to free agency. They only bring in Zach Allen, and they don't bring in anybody through the draft for the defensive line. Now looking at the linebacker position, they run a 3-4, so definitely more of an emphasis here on linebackers than you would see with some other teams. And of course they bring in Frank Clark, who can fill in with Baron Browning on the PUP list Frank Clark honestly might just hold on to the starting position even once Baron Browning is healthy. Then on the other outside edge, you have Randy Gregory. So between the two of them, both have a proven track record in the NFL. You know they're going to be getting to the quarterback. Then you also have Nick Bonito, the second-year player who could potentially rotate in, and of course Baron Browning once he becomes healthy. Then for looking at just backups, reserves here, guys who are on the fringe of the roster, there's a competition going on right now between Aaron Patrick and Christopher Allen, so certainly worth keeping an eye on that battle. And looking at the inside linebacker position, we have Josie Jewell and Alex Singleton, former Eagle. Just being an Eagles fan and watching Alex Singleton over the years, I will say with him, he's a player who's going to give you 110% on every play. You know he's never going to he's always going to leave everything out on the field, never going to leave anything to be desired in terms of effort. And they also have Drew Sanders, who they just took with their third round selection this year. So young talent being infused here as well, could certainly step into either of these roles beyond 2023 if Jewell or Singleton depart. But I believe Alex Singleton is signed for the next few seasons. We'll see that when we get to Denver's salary cap situation. But finally looking at this Denver secondary, and honestly, this is one of the best units in the entire National Football League, I will say. And like with any unit that is considered one of the best in the National Football League at any position, it starts by having a star player, which Denver certainly does here, Pat Surtain II. And when you have somebody like that, it really just helps the rest of this unit fall into place because now you don't need to find a number one corner. You have one. So all you really need to do is find a number two corner, two safeties that complement them well, and a nickel corner. So absolutely one of the better units in the NFL. At the other corner position here, we do have a battle going on right now between Damari Mathis and rookie Riley Moss. So competition brings out the best in everybody. May the best man win. These are both two young men. Riley Moss, a rookie, as I mentioned, and Damari Mathis only in his second season. So both of those guys definitely figure to be part of the picture going forward for Denver. Then at the safety position, they have Caden Stearns and Justin Simmons, with Kareem Jackson coming in as a reserve and potentially even J.L. Skinner, the rookie. Then they do have the second man here as well, Delarian Turner-Yell. Three of them will be competing along with PJ Locke to see who will be the two reserve centers, with the two starting spots pretty much locked up already. Justin Simmons, of course, with that ridiculous 6 interceptions in 12 games last season. Then finally at the nickel corner, it figures to be Kwan Williams. So definitely a solid secondary unit for Denver. And honestly, I love this back seven as a whole, if I'm being honest. Defensive line definitely leaves something to be desired, but I would say that's really the Achilles heel of this unit as a whole. That being said, we can look ahead to Denver's 2023 schedule. How's all this going to shake out once we actually get on the field and start playing games? So they start out right away with a divisional matchup, and it should be a win. They're at home against the Las Vegas Raiders, and as you can see by my projected standings here, I really don't have a lot of faith in the Las Vegas Raiders. We should be coming up on their video very soon as well, but I wasn't a fan of the offseason they had at all. I don't love the moves they made in the slightest. Was not a huge fan of... I didn't mind their draft, I guess, but I just don't think they're going to improve, and this was a team that already didn't make the playoffs last year. I can at least look at Denver and say, yeah, I feel like they will make a noticeable improvement this year. I feel like their team's certainly trending in the right direction, so give Denver the nod over Vegas in Week 1. Then Week 2, we have Denver going up against the Washington Commanders, again at home this time, so I like the matchup of Pat Surtain versus Terry McLaurin. That'll certainly be a fun one to watch. I like Pat Surtain in that matchup, though Scary Terry is never to be underestimated. But that being said, Sam Howell is the one throwing him the football, and despite Denver's potentially weak defensive line, Washington has a very weak offensive line as well, so that kind of offsets Denver's weakest point on their team. So I think Denver gets off to a hot start here at 2-0, and they'll certainly need it because the schedule does get much tougher as we go along here. But Week 3, they go down to Miami to visit the Dolphins on September 24th, so that'll certainly be a game that is very hot, if I had to guess. Just temperature-wise for the Broncos, they might struggle with to adjust to the climate, and they will be going up against Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill. Pat Surtain will only be able to get one of those guys, so one of the two young players is going to have to try to contain the other one. And then Miami's defense going up against Denver's offense. Don't love that matchup for Denver's offense either, so Miami might be able to edge out a win. This could potentially be a close game, though. Week 4, they're going to go up to Chicago, and honestly, I think Denver's just a better team than Chicago at this point. Chicago's still figuring things out. They're, like I mentioned in the Chicago video, their whole season just kind of seems to be dedicated to figuring out what Justin Fields is. Is he their quarterback? Is he not? They've put pieces around him for success, so I don't think they're going to be bottom of the league again this year, but they're certainly a team that's still trying to figure things out, and Denver's just going to pounce on that. Then in week 5, they come home again for the Nathaniel Hackett revenge game, if you will. Nathaniel Hackett coming back against his former team with, as of now, the offensive coordinator of the New York Jets with Aaron Rodgers. And honestly, Denver could say they're prepared for this game all they want. The Jets are coming in here with a purpose, and that purpose is to whoop Sean Payton and the Denver Broncos. So even if this game isn't a shellacking like the Jets might expect, or would hope for, I guess I should say, I do think the New York Jets win this football game. Then Denver comes back on a short week against the Kansas City Chiefs at Arrowhead Stadium. Don't love their chances there either, so they fall to 3-3 after just 6 weeks of play. Then they get a bit of an extended rest where they go up against Green Bay coming off of a full week of rest. This could be a potentially fascinating game here as well. Jordan Love coming in to visit the Denver Broncos, though. I do think at this point in the season, Denver should have the upper hand. Jordan Love and the Packers, I do think, will certainly have their ups and downs this season. They'll be trying to figure things out too as the season goes along. Maybe they do put up a bit more of a fight here because they are coming off of their bye, but this could be a fun game as well. Look forward to that one. Coming off of that, Denver stays at home against the Kansas City Chiefs, so they get Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs twice in 3 weeks. I do think the Chiefs are just going to be too much for the Broncos, but that being said, if the Broncos are to win one of these 2 games against the Chiefs, I'll give them the better shot in this Week 8 matchup for sure at home, not coming off of the short week, and the fact that they do have film off of Kansas City against their team just 2 weeks prior. So I do think the Chiefs end up sweeping the Broncos, although this one could certainly be a lot more competitive than the Week 6 matchup. Watch now, Denver will come out and win in Week 6, but then they get their bye in Week 9, and coming out of that bye week, the schedule really isn't doing them any favors. They do get the extra day of rest, not having to play again until Monday night, but it's at Buffalo against the Bills, so not really much you can do about that. Say what you will about the Broncos, and maybe they'll be prepared coming off of the bye, how Sean Payton's going to have these guys ready. Buffalo's the better team. I don't really think that's too much of a debate. That being said, Denver does get 2 home games after this, and they are against 2 talented teams, the Minnesota Vikings and the Cleveland Browns on back-to-back weeks. And these could definitely be 2 very important games for the Broncos. I think this is really where they're starting to face the reality of what their season's going to be, because by this point, I had them 3-3 coming out of Week 6, so they'd be 4-4 going into the bye week. So then entering this stretch, they'd be 4-5. So it's of the utmost importance they're able to win these 2 games at home, because I really do think this is a pretty reasonable outcome for the beginning of the schedule here. You could debate some of these games going either way, but I think 4-5 is a pretty reasonable place to expect Denver by this point in the season. So they lose these 2 games, they fall to 4-7, and they're pretty much out of the AFC playoff picture. But hypothetically, if they were to win these 2 games, that would put them at 6-5 and still certainly alive in the thick of the playoff race, because then they go to Houston in Week 13, which Denver is certainly a better team than Houston at this point. So that would put them at 7-5, so they would certainly be in a good spot there. Coming off of that, though, they have yet to play the Los Angeles Chargers, who they will have to play twice. As much as I think Denver's going to improve this year, LA is one of the best teams in the NFL right now, so the Chargers are going to take this game. Again, divisional games you can never count out either way. Denver could certainly make this one competitive, but right now I'll give it to the Chargers. Denver will respond, though, against the Detroit Lions the following week on a Saturday, Saturday, December 16th, as a matter of fact, but this could be a big game for them as well. Now we're well into December. They really need this win to stay alive in the playoff race. It's against the team in Detroit who also figures to be in their playoff race. And Denver I have hanging on to this one. But then they come home against the New England Patriots the following week, and I do end up having them losing the final 3 games of the season here. So hypothetically, I mean, we could mess around with this. I have Denver end up finishing 8-9 because of this with a 1-5 record in the AFC West, but even if we tinker around with this and have them beat the Patriots, and the only reason I have them losing to the Raiders here is because I figured their season's pretty much, they'll understand they're out of the playoffs by the time we get to here, like mathematically. So they might just be tired from all these tough games they're coming off of and not really care about it too much. Vegas takes the win there, but hypothetically, let's say they could beat the Patriots, beat the Vegas Raiders in the final week of the season. They go 10-7. As we could see, just based off of this scenario, still wouldn't be enough to make the AFC playoffs. They would only even be the 10th seed with a 10-7 record. And even if we gave them another win over the Los Angeles Chargers here, it would propel them to the 9th seed at 11-6, but still not enough to make the playoffs. As we see here, Pittsburgh is still out of the playoff picture with a 12-5 record. So this AFC just so brutal this year. So when all's said and done, I do have Denver with an 8-9 record. I mean, you could say it's 9-8 if they win this game, potentially even 10-7 if they could beat the Patriots, but I don't really see them doing much better than 10-7. I think that's probably a good ceiling for this Denver Broncos unit, and that's definitely nothing to be upset about. This is a team that went 5-12 last year. I know a lot of Broncos fans would love to have me sit here and say, "Oh yeah, Denver's gonna go 12-5 and make the playoffs," but this is a tough conference. It really is just a tough conference. There's so many teams that are truly just very special, just absolutely wonderful teams that are talented from top to bottom. And Denver ends up as the 12th seed, which is crazy because I do think the Denver Broncos are not a bad team by any means, but you look at the teams ahead of them and it's tough to say like these aren't bad football teams by any means. So 11 I have the Tennessee Titans, 10 the Miami Dolphins, 9 the Cleveland Browns, 8 the Pittsburgh Steelers, 7 the New York Jets, 6 the Baltimore Ravens, 5 the LA Chargers, 4 the Jacksonville Jaguars, and then the big 3, the Bills, Bengals, and Chiefs, 3-2-1. These are no slouches. This is not going to be an easy conference by any means. Certainly a polar opposite of the NFC, I would say, where it's wide open at the moment. So this 2023 AFC, it'd be funny, watch the NFC end up winning the Super Bowl this year, but whoever ends up winning the AFC, even if they don't win the Super Bowl, that is an achievement of itself because this conference is just so deep this year, and Denver should not be upset if they don't end up making the playoffs this year. I do think, though, that they will be right around 500, whether that's 8-9, 9-8, potentially even 10-7. So we'll see how the season goes for the Broncos. And on that note, we will quickly look at the Broncos cap situation going into this over the next few seasons, I guess I should say. And then we'll round out with their future draft picks before we call it a day. So looking at their cap situation, this Russell Wilson contract is certainly what stands out. It is structured as such where this year's cap hit is only $22 million, next year's only $35, but then it balloons up to north of $50 million for the following 3 seasons. I do think a restructure again will have to happen at some point because this is just absolutely absurd for, let me look at his age here real quick. Russell Wilson's 35 now this season, so by the time so he's 35, 36, 37, 30, he'll be 39 making with over a $50 million cap hit. I just don't know about that. Denver's going to have to figure something out with that because we start to look at these other positions. They have Samaje Perine and Javonte Williams locked up for the next 2 seasons, but definitely a question mark after that. looking at the wide receiver spot, they have Courtland Sutton signed for the next 3 seasons, Tim Patrick for the next 2, and Jerry Jeudy on the last year of his rookie deal this year before he gets his club option for 2024. But 2025, I think Jerry Jeudy's going to get a sizable extension, especially if he continues his development. And if he does become the player that I believe he can be, he should be making north of $20 million by the time we get to 2025. So that's going to be another noticeable cap hit. You're still going to have Courtland Sutton on the books. Russell Wilson still for another 3 seasons, north of $50 million. Then at the tight end spot, you have Greg Dulcich signed for 3 seasons at a reasonable cap hit, so no sweat there. Looking at this offensive line, though, a lot of money invested here. Mike McGlinchey and Ben Powers, the 2 off-season acquisitions. After this season, their cap hits are both going to be north of $15 million. Mike McGlinchey actually becomes north of $20 million for 2025, 2026, and 2027. And this was a player who is 28 going on 29, so by the time we get here, he'll be well into his 30s, making north of $20 million. I mean, maybe he becomes a fantastic player for the Broncos and really is that missing piece on that offensive line, but geez, the money's going to get a little tight here in a couple of years. Because then a player like Lloyd Cushenberry could very well be a cap casualty, like we mentioned with that backup battle going on at the center position. That could very well prove to be necessary because Lloyd Cushenberry could be in his final season with the Denver Broncos here. So then moving along to the defense, DJ Jones on the defensive line signed for just the next 2 seasons. Zach Allen signed at big money for the next 4, although 2024 and 2025 are certainly the most notable in terms of cap hit. This contract looks like it has a lot of flexibility to potentially be restructured or even potentially early termination. Then Frank Clark listed as a defensive end here. I don't know why his contract's listed as a 4-year one here. He's really only just signed to a 1-year deal. I think something similar with Zach Allen's going on here as well. In fact, let's pull up Zach Allen's contract real quick. Just take a look at this, see what Spotrac has to say. So, okay, this is a 3-year contract with a potential out after 2025. And even then, it would still have $7.5 million in dead cap, so it would technically free up around $10 million in cap space, though his cap hit will be $19 million in 2024 and $17 million in 2025. It looks like this 2026 season is more of like a void year, although it doesn't specify that as such. Definitely be interested to see how that shakes out. But again, though, it seems like with this defensive line, not really much opportunity for them to really upgrade it unless they're using draft capital on that in 2024. So moving along, we can see Randy Gregory signed for big money for the next 4 seasons as well. So it seems like Denver has a lot of contracts with north of $15 million in terms of cap hit. So we can really look at this in the 2025 season alone. They have Randy Gregory, Zach Allen, Ben Powers, Mike McGlinchey, Courtland Sutton, and Russell Wilson. So that's 7 players making north of $15 million on the cap in 2025. And they're at 180 right now with 34 players under contract, so they do have some flexibility still, but look at some of these names they need to re-sign. They need to figure out something at running back by 2025. Jerry Jeudy's going to be due for a contract extension. They're going to have Garrett Bolus, their left tackle, due for a contract. They're going to need to figure something out at center even before then. DJ Jones will be a free agent by 2025, so one of the few defensive linemen they do have. Then they're going to have Pat Surtain will be on his 5th-year club option almost certainly in 2025, but he's going to be looking for the bag probably after this season when he's eligible, honestly, but certainly by 2026 he's going to be due for a substantial raise, and he's certainly going to be making north of $15 million as well. So Denver certainly has their hands tied a little bit here in terms of money long term, but I guess that's why they're going all in with a guy like Sean Payton, who's already won a Super Bowl, somebody like Russell Wilson, who's already won a Super Bowl. They want to try to get results now, but as we saw with this AFC, that's quite a tall task. So finally, to round this out, we'll look at Denver's future draft picks, just because there is a little bit of note here. So for 2024, they do lose their 2024 second round pick to the New Orleans Saints for the rights to the bounty string master himself, Sean Payton, and in turn, they do acquire another third round pick in 2024 from the New Orleans Saints, although they do owe a third round pick to the Seattle Seahawks from a trade this past year. It is unclear if that is the Broncos' original pick or the pick they acquired from New Orleans. So they have a first round pick, 0 second round picks, and 1 third round pick, and we don't know if that pick belongs to the Broncos or the Saints. Then in the fourth round, sort of a similar thing here where they acquire a fourth round pick from the Miami Dolphins, but they owe one to the New York Jets. Again, not specified if they owe the Jets their own pick or the Dolphins pick, so just 1 fourth round pick in 2024. Fifth round, they do have 2 fifth round picks, courtesy of the New York Jets, and then sixth round, another one of these uncertain trades. They acquire a sixth round pick from the LA Rams, but they owe one to the Buffalo Bills. And then they do have 2 seventh round picks as well. And of note in 2025, they do not have the 2025 fifth round pick. They gave that up in the Bradley Chubb trade. So that about does it for Denver. As I said, I have them projected to finish 8 and 9. I'd love to hear from Broncos Country. How do you guys think they're going to shake out this year? Is 8 and 9 too harsh? 1 and 5 record in the division too harsh? Think these guys end up with a winning record this year, or do you think that's appropriate? And what about Russell Wilson? Do you think he's going to take a step forward this year? Do you think the new coaching staff and improved offensive line is going to really help him get back to his Seattle days? Or do you think we really saw the best of him already when he was in Seattle and Russ is cooked instead of cooking? So that's all I've got on the Denver Broncos. I will look forward to the next video where we talk about the Detroit Lions for the second take as well with that one. So that'll certainly be a fun one. Look forward to talking to you guys then. Thank you.